Unaware his wife was the billionaire CEO who secretly saved his family from bankruptcy, he walked into the courthouse that morning wearing his best suit, not to thank her, but to divorce her to marry his rich boss's daughter. Everyone in the city knew her as the quiet woman behind her husband's success, but no one knew she owned the empire that kept his father's company alive. She watched him sign the papers with trembling fingers, her silence holding more power than his pride, because the man divorcing her had no idea he was leaving the very woman who once saved his name. But when the truth finally surfaced, what she did next didn't just shock him. It shattered everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and power. So why did the billionaire CEO hide her identity from her own husband? And then what exactly did she do after he traded her for wealth she already owned? The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. She sat on the bench, her hands clasped together, her wedding ring cutting softly into her skin. Across the aisle, he stood beside his attorney, confident, cold, and untouchably proud. The kind of man who looked like he was born to win, but only because someone else quietly made sure he never lost. She used to be that someone. For years, she built her life around protecting him, nurturing his dreams, funding his family's survival without ever letting him know. But today, as he avoided her eyes, she realized he never once saw her. Not really. He smirked at her briefly, that same condescending curve of his lips that once made her believe he was just nervous. Now she understood it was arrogance, polished into charm. The judge's voice blurred as memories overlapped with the moment. The night his father had come to her in tears, pleading for help to save their collapsing company. She had wired the money within hours, her name hidden under a shell corporation. It was supposed to be a temporary lifeline. It became the reason his family survived. And now, as he filed for divorce, it was also the reason she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. He signed his name with a flourish, as if cutting her out of his life was a business transaction. "You'll land on your feet," he said under his breath. "You always do." She looked up at him, calm, steady, unreadable. "I usually do," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. But it wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Because the man she loved had become the man she would one day destroy, not through revenge, but through revelation. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. His new fiancée, the boss's daughter, waited in a gleaming black car, her hand draped out the window holding a diamond too large to be subtle. Reporters swarmed them, asking questions about their engagement, their future. No one noticed the woman standing in the shadow of the marble steps, clutching her divorce papers in a silence more dignified than tears. She turned away quietly, her breath shaking in the chill morning air. Back home, the apartment was too quiet. The kitchen clock ticked with painful precision. She sat at the table where they used to eat breakfast, where laughter once filled the air. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. It felt like betrayal had left fingerprints everywhere. Her best friend, the one she had confided in, had known about his affair. She had helped him plan the proposal to his new love. That knowledge broke something deep inside her that no wealth could repair. Even her own brother had chosen his side, convinced by the charm and confidence of the man who had just discarded her. She was alone, completely. Days blurred into nights. The media mocked her publicly when the story broke. The devoted wife left for the heiress. They painted her as naive, out of touch, too simple for a man with ambition. She read the headlines once, then never again. But each word carved a quiet scar into her soul. He, on the other hand, thrived in the attention. He smiled in interviews, his arm around his new fiancée, painting their love as a new chapter. He built his image on her silence, branding himself as the self-made man who found real love after hardship. The lie tasted sweet to him, but the truth she held, would one day choke him. For weeks she said nothing. She didn't fight back. She didn't post, didn't argue, didn't even speak his name. She spent her days staring at spreadsheets, at the remnants of the company she once built quietly under another name. Her fortune was hidden beneath layers of trusts and legal walls, invisible to everyone, including him. Her mind was still sharp, her instinct intact, but her heart, that needed time to harden, and it did. Slowly, painfully, purposefully. One evening, while the city lights shimmered across her kitchen window, she made a decision. She opened her laptop, logged into her private holding firm, and began reviewing dormant projects, small real estate assets she had abandoned years ago. The old spark reignited in her chest. If she could build empires in secret before, she could do it again. Only this time, she would do it with her name. The night deepened as she drafted her first plan, a redevelopment project in a struggling district. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was rebirth. A quiet storm beginning to form far from his spotlight. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, carrying with it the first whisper of something inevitable. That the man who humiliated her publicly was already standing at the edge of his own downfall, and she would be the one to hold the mirror when it came. The weeks that followed felt like a long winter, even in summer. She woke up every morning before dawn, brewed her coffee in silence, and stared at the city skyline as if memorizing its every secret. The world outside had already moved on. Headlines had faded, his interviews had slowed, and his new engagement had become just another piece of corporate gossip. But she remembered every word, every smile, every whisper behind her back. The humiliation had burned into her like fire, but she didn't let it consume her. She let it forge her. Her old contacts stopped returning her calls. The few who did only offered pity disguised as concern. One former colleague said, "You're strong. You'll find something small to keep you busy." Small. The word echoed like an insult. They didn't know who they were talking to, or what she was capable of. Beneath the quiet woman they thought was broken, the billionaire CEO they never saw was waking up again. She started small, deliberately, a consulting gig for a failing construction firm, late nights drafting recovery plans, fixing supply chains, and building profit models in her one-bedroom apartment. She didn't ask for credit. She asked for shares. Every paycheck, every late night, every small win became a stone in the foundation of something much larger. Her silence became her weapon, her patience, her armor. Sometimes she would see his face on the news, standing beside his fiancée, giving press statements about innovation and legacy. He spoke with the same rehearsed confidence she used to coach him through. Back then, she had believed in his potential more than he did. She'd stayed up at night rewriting his speeches, guiding him through deals, making sure his father's company didn't collapse under the weight of his arrogance. Now, watching him take credit for ideas that once came from her, she felt something strange, not anger, but distance, as if he was already a relic from a life she'd outgrown. One rainy evening, while sorting financial reports at a local cafe, she overheard two businessmen discussing an upcoming real estate auction, a block of undervalued industrial properties near the river. She listened quietly, her mind already calculating. By the time they finished their coffee, she had a plan forming in her notebook. Within weeks, she acquired two of the lots anonymously through her holding firm. It was the beginning of her rise. Quiet, precise, invisible. The first time she signed the deed under her own name, she felt something powerful. Not triumph, but clarity. She realized she didn't need to expose herself yet. Power didn't come from being seen. It came from being unshakable. Each deal, each partnership, each acquisition grew her reach. Investors who once ignored her began to notice the mysterious buyer reshaping the city's forgotten districts. Her assistant, a young woman named Layla she'd met at a charity event, became her confidant. Layla was ambitious but loyal, sharp but kind. She had no idea her boss was the same woman the media once mocked as the discarded wife. To Layla, she was Miss Arden, an enigma with calm authority and an uncanny instinct for turning failure into gold. Late one night, Layla knocked gently on her office door, her face pale with disbelief. "Ms. Arden, you need to see this," she said, holding a folder. Inside were shareholder records. "We've been buying into Helios Group through several intermediaries for years. Your holdings now make up more than 51%. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The name Helios Group shimmered in bold letters on the page. Her ex-husband's company, his empire, the one he built on her silence. Her pulse steadied as she read through the papers. Years of calculated patience had led her here, without her even realizing how close she'd come to owning it all. 51%, she repeated softly, her eyes distant. It's poetic. Layla hesitated. Do you want to make it public? She smiled faintly, the corner of her lips curling with something between sadness and serenity. Not yet, she said. Patience built this. Pride destroyed it. Let's give pride a little more time to finish the job. Outside the window, lightning flared across the city skyline. The glass reflected her calm face, no longer the broken woman in the kitchen, but someone reborn. Someone who understood that revenge didn't need to be loud to be final. Her phone buzzed. A news alert flashed across the screen. Helios CEO to host annual gala honoring expansion into global markets. His smiling face filled the headline. The same arrogance, the same polished grin, the same delusion of control. She watched the video clip where he bragged about how adversity had made him stronger, how he overcame personal setbacks to inspire a new generation. She almost laughed. He thought he had written the story of his success, but he had no idea he was just a chapter in hers. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and whispered under her breath, You wanted a stage. I'll give you one. The storm outside broke into heavy rain. The city glowed beneath the thunderclouds, restless and alive. Like her. The woman he divorced was gone. In her place stood the billionaire CEO who would soon remind the world and him exactly who saved his family, who built his empire, and who now owned every piece of it. The months that followed turned into years, but she didn't count them. Time had lost its weight. What mattered now was movement, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. Her name began circulating through private investor circles, whispered with the kind of reverence reserved for legends that didn't seek fame. No one really knew who Miss Arden was. They only knew that every company she touched revived, every property she acquired multiplied in value. She didn't chase opportunity, she created it. Her office sat high above the city, glass walls overlooking the skyline she once watched from a cramped kitchen window. She kept it minimalist, a white desk, a few potted plants, a framed photo of her late mother who had taught her that dignity meant choosing silence when chaos demanded noise. The view was her reminder. She had rebuilt herself from nothing, not to prove a point, but to remember that she could. Sometimes she would hear his name in passing, at business luncheons, charity events, board meetings. Ethan Caldwell, they'd say, his name spoken with that old mix of respect and envy. He was still the poster boy for charm and ambition, still living off the illusion of self-made success. But his empire had begun to show cracks. His expansion projects were over-leveraged. His management decisions, reckless. The same arrogance that once drew people in was now driving them away. And still, he didn't know who held the strings tightening around him. One morning, while reviewing a new acquisition report, she received an unexpected message. An invitation sealed in gold foil, embossed with the Helios Group crest. Inside, in elegant calligraphy, it read, You are cordially invited to the annual Helios Gala, hosted by CEO Ethan Caldwell. The irony made her laugh softly. It was clear he had no idea. To him, she was still the discarded ex-wife, the woman he had left in the ashes of public humiliation. And now, unknowingly, he was inviting her to the very event that would begin his fall. Layla found her later that day, studying the invitation. You're not seriously considering going, are you? She asked. He's doing this to parade himself. You know that. She looked up, eyes calm. I know, that's why I'm going. Layla frowned. He's cruel. He'll try to humiliate you again. A quiet smile touched her lips. Maybe, but humiliation only works when you still have something to lose. That night, as the city settled into its glowing rhythm, she sat by her window with a glass of wine, thinking of the woman she had been, the one who used to wait for him to come home, who excused his neglect, who believed love would make him kind. That woman had died the day he chose power over partnership. The one who remained was different, deliberate, unbreakable, and most importantly, invisible until she decided otherwise. She remembered the first time she met him years ago, in a college business seminar. He'd been charming then, confident but raw. She'd seen potential in him and believed she could nurture it. She had mistaken potential for purpose. Now she saw clearly he had never wanted to build, only to own. Her thoughts drifted to her brother, the one who had betrayed her trust by siding with Ethan when things fell apart. He had called her months ago, asking to meet. She had agreed out of courtesy, not forgiveness. Over coffee, he'd looked at her with guilt etched into his face. "He told us you were unstable," he'd said quietly, "that you were trying to sabotage him. We believed him." "And now," she asked. Her brother had lowered his eyes. "Now I see we were wrong. I want us to be family again." She'd smiled politely. "Family doesn't vanish when you're silent. It vanishes when you're convenient." Then she'd stood and left. She didn't hate him. She simply didn't need him anymore. Weeks before the gala, she made a series of quiet moves. Strategic acquisitions, subtle shifts in ownership, anonymous transfers of influence. Each one tightened her control. The Helios boardroom was unknowingly becoming hers. When Layla brought her the updated ownership documents, confirming her position as the majority shareholder, she only nodded. There was no triumph in her expression, only inevitability. The night before the gala, she received a call from an old business contact, one of Ethan's former investors. "He's overconfident," the man said. "He thinks the board is untouchable. He plans to make a spectacle tomorrow, announce his expansion into Asia, boast about his vision, but his numbers don't add up. He's stretched too thin." She thanked him, her tone steady. "Then tomorrow will be quite the performance," she replied. After the call, she stood by her window again, the city lights flickering below. It was strange. She didn't feel hatred, only a quiet sense of balance. He had taken everything from her once, her dignity, her name, her peace, and now she had taken everything back, not through destruction, but through mastery. She turned off the lights and walked to her closet. Her gown for tomorrow hung waiting. Black silk, simple, regal, deliberate. It wasn't revenge she planned to wear. It was closure. As the clock ticked past midnight, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, echoing through the skyline. The storm was coming, but this time, she wasn't the one bracing for it. She was the one bringing it. The gala glittered like a coronation. Chandeliers dripped with gold light. Laughter rippled through champagne bubbles, and every camera in the city waited for Ethan Caldwell to make his grand entrance. It was the night he'd been preparing for, the night he would parade his success before the world, with his new fiancée on his arm and the ghost of his past buried under applause. But the ghost wasn't buried. She was already inside. She entered through the marble foyer in a black silk gown that caught the light like liquid midnight. Heads turned as she passed. Not in pity, not in recognition, but in awe. Few people realized who she was at first. The tabloids had painted her differently. Disheveled, defeated, irrelevant. The woman walking through the ballroom now looked untouchable. Calm, poised. A presence that didn't demand attention, but drew it effortlessly. Ethan's laughter carried across the room. That familiar, polished sound she once knew by heart. He stood on the stage, shaking hands, cameras flashing. His fiancée clung to his arm in a glittering silver dress, whispering into his ear with the smug certainty of someone who believed she'd won. They hadn't noticed her yet. Not yet. She made her way to a quiet corner near the champagne table. Layla had tried to stop her from coming, begged her not to give him the satisfaction. But this wasn't about satisfaction. It was about truth. When he finally saw her, his smile faltered. Only slightly, but enough for her to notice. He hadn't expected her to show up. Not here. Not looking like this. He quickly recovered, turning his grin into something practiced. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of retirement," he said, his voice low as he approached her. "You must really miss the spotlight." She met his gaze steadily. "You seem to have enough light for both of us." He chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "I hope you're enjoying the show. Some of us moved on, built something better." She tilted her head slightly. "Yes," she said softly. "I've noticed. You've built quite a story." His fiancée joined them, slipping her arm possessively through his. "Oh, I didn't realize you were invited," she said sweetly. "How nostalgic." "It's a public gala," she replied evenly. "And I do own a few shares in Helios. I'm just here to support the company." Ethan laughed. "A few shares? You probably mean the ones you got in the divorce settlement. Cute. Enjoy the buffet. It might be the most expensive thing you touch tonight." He turned away before she could answer, signaling for the announcer to prepare the next speech. She said nothing, only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made people uneasy without knowing why. As the evening unfolded, Ethan performed. He moved through the crowd like a man conducting an orchestra, shaking hands, delivering perfectly timed jokes, basking in admiration. When the spotlight hit him on stage, he launched into his speech about success, perseverance, and destiny. "Tonight," he declared, "we celebrate expansion, innovation, and a future built by those who never gave up, by those who turn adversity into opportunity. I stand before you as proof that resilience wins." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. His fiancée clapped proudly beside the stage. And yet, something shifted, quietly. The applause felt thinner, hesitant. She noticed it first. Investors who had always idolized him now looked distracted, glancing toward her table. A few whispered to one another. The chairman of the board, seated near the front, was on his phone, his expression unreadable. Ethan noticed it too. His rhythm faltered for the first time. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh, but it sounded hollow. He lifted his glass for a toast. "To the future of Helios." The chairman suddenly rose, clearing his throat. "Before we toast," he said into the microphone, his tone formal, "there's an important update the board would like to share." Ethan froze. "Update?" The chairman gestured toward the back of the room. "Please welcome our new majority shareholder and principal executive partner, Ms. Arden." A stunned silence swept through the ballroom. Cameras swung around. All eyes turned to her. Ethan blinked, confusion twisting into disbelief. What the hell is this?" he muttered. She stood gracefully, every movement measured. As she walked toward the stage, the room parted for her like a tide. The black silk of her gown whispered against the marble floor. Each step erased a year of humiliation. Each breath rewrote the story he'd told about her. When she reached the microphone, she paused, meeting his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said softly. "I appreciate the introduction." Her voice carried across the silent hall, calm, unshaken, lethal in its composure. "It's true. Over the past few years, I've invested quietly in Helios Group, piece by piece, project by project, until tonight." She looked directly at Ethan. "Until I became its majority owner." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled for footage. Ethan's fiancée stepped back, her smile collapsing. He shook his head, face pale. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick." She handed the microphone to the chairman, who produced a document from his folder. "It's not a trick, Mr. Caldwell. The board has verified it. Effective immediately, Ms. Arden will assume control as primary shareholder." The sound of cameras clicking filled the room like a storm. Ethan's voice cracked. "You can't do this to me!" She looked at him, her tone steady. "You did this to yourself." He reached for the mic again, desperate, voice shaking now. "You think you've won? You ruined me." "No," she said quietly. "I saved you once. You ruined yourself twice." She turned back to the crowd. "Dignity," she continued, her voice unwavering, "can't be stolen. It can only be surrendered. Remember that the next time you choose pride over truth." The board members stood. The chairman nodded to security. And as Ethan was escorted out under the flash of cameras, the room erupted. Not in mockery, but in awe. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply lifted her glass, calm and composed. The woman they once pitied had become the one they now revered. The night air outside the ballroom was cold and electric. The city glowed beneath her, lights stretching endlessly across the skyline, like veins of gold. She stepped out onto the terrace, away from the flashing cameras, away from the chaos she had calmly orchestrated. For the first time in years, she exhaled, not in relief, but in release. Inside, the music played on. The guests recovered quickly, whispering to one another, already reframing their loyalties. That was the way of the world she had come to master. People didn't follow truth. They followed power. And tonight, power had a new name. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened. Layla approached, her heels soft against the marble. "They're still talking about you," she said quietly. "Every investor in there just switched allegiance. Helios is yours." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the glittering horizon. "It was never about taking it," she murmured. "It was about showing him what he never saw." Layla hesitated. "Are you okay?" She smiled faintly. "Better than okay." In the distance, she could still hear Ethan's voice echoing faintly through the hall. Anger, confusion, disbelief. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. For years, she had lived in the shadow of his ambition, convincing herself that love meant sacrifice. That silence was weakness. But tonight, she realized silence had always been her greatest strength. It wasn't surrender, it was control. As the night stretched on, the memory of the courthouse came flooding back. That same man signing divorce papers with pride, his hands steady, his gaze cold. She remembered thinking she had lost everything that day, but now, standing at the height of her empire, she saw it differently. That day hadn't been her ending. It had been her beginning. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A message from an unknown number. "You won. I hope you're happy." She stared at it for a moment, then typed slowly. "It was never about winning. It was about remembering who I was." She didn't hit send. Instead, she deleted the message and powered off the phone. Some stories didn't need replies. Layla returned a few minutes later with 2 glasses of champagne. "To freedom?" she asked. She accepted the glass. "To truth," she corrected softly, clinking the rim against Layla's. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the city below them, the stars faint but visible above. Somewhere deep inside, she felt peace. Not the fragile peace of avoidance, but the sturdy kind built on reclaiming what was taken. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Billionaire CEO revealed ex-wife of Ethan Caldwell secretly acquires Helios Group. From humiliation to power, the woman who outsmarted her ex. She was the billionaire who saved his family and then took his empire. Her phone rang nonstop. News outlets wanted interviews. Magazines wanted covers. Investors wanted meetings. But she declined them all. She had no interest in gloating. Her silence had spoken louder than any press release could. At noon, she walked into her new office at Helios headquarters, the same space that once belonged to him. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of the city she had rebuilt herself through. His nameplate had already been removed from the desk. She didn't replace it. She didn't need to. Her brother called that afternoon. When she answered, his voice was careful. "I saw the news," he said. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't," she replied gently. He paused. "I was wrong, you know, about everything. I should have believed you." She took a long breath. "You believed what you needed to at the time. We all do. But I'm done living in the past." "Does that mean we can start over?" he asked hopefully. She hesitated, her eyes on the skyline. "Maybe," she said softly. "But starting over doesn't mean going back." When the call ended, she leaned back in her chair. The quiet was comforting. She thought of everything it had taken. The betrayal, the isolation, the sleepless nights. Pain had been the forge, but resilience had been the fire that shaped her. Across town, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, watching his own downfall replayed across every channel. His fiancée was gone, his reputation crumbling. Every friend who once laughed at her now avoided him. The empire he flaunted had been stripped bare. He poured himself another drink, but the silence in his apartment was deafening. Somewhere deep inside, he realized the cruel irony. He had spent his life chasing power, only to lose everything to the woman who never needed to raise her voice to claim it. Back at Helios, the boardroom doors opened. A few senior members entered, congratulating her on her composure. She thanked them politely, but her eyes lingered on the city below. Power didn't excite her anymore. Peace did. That evening, she left the office and walked home alone, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She passed the same courthouse where everything had begun. For a moment she stopped, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass doors. Then she smiled. In that smile lived every scar, every lesson, every quiet victory. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need applause. She had reclaimed her story, her dignity, her silence, and somewhere in the quiet hum of the city, the world seemed to bow its head, not to her wealth, not to her title, but to the unshakable truth that sometimes the most powerful revenge is not destruction, but becoming everything they thought you couldn't be. The woman he once left in the shadows was gone. The billionaire CEO who saved his family had finally saved herself. 5 years later, the world knew her name, not as someone's ex-wife, but as a force that reshaped industries and redefined quiet power. Her company, Elysian Holdings, had become one of the most influential conglomerates in America, leading in innovation, philanthropy, and ethical reforms. But for her, success wasn't measured in numbers anymore. It was measured in peace. She moved out of the city months after the Helios takeover, trading glass towers for a coastal home overlooking the Pacific. Mornings were slow now, coffee on the balcony, ocean breeze in her hair, sunlight catching the edges of a life once lived in shadows. There were no cameras, no meetings, no whispers, just her, the sound of waves, and the peace she'd fought so long to find. Sometimes, though, when the wind carried the scent of the city she left behind, fragments of memory would drift through her mind. A courthouse, a broken vow, a name she no longer flinched to hear. Ethan. She didn't hate him anymore. Time had softened what anger once burned inside her. She'd realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about setting herself free. In the quiet, she could finally see it all for what it was. Two people trapped in different kinds of blindness. He had been blinded by ambition. She had been blinded by love. Across the country, Ethan lived a different kind of silence. The fall had been brutal, public, relentless. His father's company collapsed after the scandal, and the world moved on without him. He worked quietly now, managing small projects, avoiding cameras, avoiding mirrors. The once proud man who thought he could own everything had learned how to live with nothing. One day he saw her again, not in person, but on television. She was receiving a humanitarian award for rebuilding women-owned businesses across multiple states. Her speech was brief, graceful, and deeply human. Power, she said, isn't about control. It's about choice. The choice to build, to forgive, to begin again. He turned off the TV halfway through, not out of bitterness, but out of something that felt like quiet respect. He realized then that the woman he'd left had always been ahead of him, not in wealth, but in soul. Months later, she received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single note written in the familiar handwriting. Thank you for saving my family, and for teaching me what real strength looks like. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see it. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into a drawer. She didn't need to reply. Some apologies are meant to be heard only once. That evening, she walked barefoot along the shoreline, the sunset bleeding gold across the horizon. For the first time, she felt no ghosts following her, no bitterness, no need to prove anything, just the soft, simple truth that she had turned her pain into purpose, her silence into power. As the tide rolled in, she whispered quietly to herself, unaware he was losing the woman who once saved him, he taught me how to save myself. The waves carried her words into the distance, dissolving them into the sea, not as a memory, but as peace. And somewhere far away, in a quiet apartment lit by regret, a man looked toward the same sunset and finally understood the cost of what he'd thrown away. She smiled, closing her eyes against the wind. The world could keep its noise. She had found her freedom in silence. The woman he divorced was gone. The billionaire CEO who once saved his family had built an empire on grace, and this time she saved herself.